Hello everyone, welcome to Reboot and Rise with MLR. As we discussed during the variables introduction, we have seen like if you want to send a data to Java application and then finally to database, or if you want to fetch any data from database and to the application then finally to reach to the customer. So in between, the data will be stored in something called as RAM memory, and to hold that data during this phase we need something called as a variables, right? So assume like this data is coming here. How does it knows? Example, I have some variable, I have some email. How does JVM knows this should hold some sequence of characters, this should hold some sequence of characters, this should hold some numbers, right? And how does JVM knows how much amount of memory it's supposed to allocate to store this data, right? For this data, once it comes here and it will be stored into variable, and finally there should be some memory allocation to happen. So how JVM knows what type of information to put into this one, this one, and how much memory it's supposed to allocate. That's where something called as data types comes into picture. Okay, so the data type specify what kind of data that a variable will hold and how much memory should be allocated for that variable. Okay, so in Java, basically like we have two types of data types. I mean like basically the classification is categorized into two types. One is primitive data, and this is the basic data types in primitive, and we have mainly four types of primitive data types like integer, floating, character, and a boolean. Again in integer we have a byte, short, int, long, and float, double, char, true, false. Whereas non-primitive data, that is object references. So if you write any class, if you create an object, and each object will have a reference. So we will talk about those in the object-oriented programming. So for this discussion, let's concentrate on these basic data types or primitive data types. So if we start with the integer data types, so if you want to store a number, assume like you are sending a phone number or you are sending some product ID. So if you are sending numbers to the program, or if you are reading numbers from the database through your program, so to hold the data, we use these integer data types. So we have these four types: byte, short, int, long. So when I use a byte to a variable, and the amount of memory it is going to allocate is 1 byte, and and the range is 128 minus 128 to 127, that's minus 2 power 7 to 2 power 7 minus 1. So if you want to store beyond that one, I assume like I want to store 150 or 200, think that as a user we are giving 200 as an input. So if you want to store, then we need to go with short. And if you go with a variable and whose data type is short, it allocates 2 bytes for that one, and this is the range. Similarly, beyond this range, if you want to store beyond this range, assume like if you want to store 50,000 as an input, if you give it to a program, if you want to store that one, we need to go with a variable whose type is integer, and it allocates 4 bytes of memory in the RAM. The range is this one. So think that if you want to store a bigger number like a phone number, 10-digit phone number, then integer is not enough. So we need to go with the long, where the size is 8 bytes, the range is this one. So example, how do we define these integer variables is, so I'll go with byte, my variable name, and whatever the value I want to assign. So similarly, short, variable name, the value, int, product ID, the value, long, total sale, the value. So there is a small difference here. So by default, when you define a long variable, long sum whatever the variable equals some value, in the memory, by default it will allocate only 4 bytes, like that is integer size. But if you want to make sure like it should allocate 8 bytes, then we'll put L. So when you put L, then only it will allocate 8 bytes. Because for better performance and to save the memory, the Java has designed like by default for long, the memory it's going to allocate is only 4 bytes. But explicitly if we specify L, then it will allocate 8 bytes. Okay. Now let's look into the next data type, float. Assume like if you want to store a number with a decimal, Then we go with float. Example, I want to store a product price like 99.99, something like that. So in float we have two types. One is float and data type. I mean, like to store a number with a decimal, we have two options. One is float, other one is double. So for float, we have a 4 bytes date memory allocation, and for double, it will allocate 8 bytes. The range is plus or minus 3.4 times 10 times 38. So that means after decimal up to 7 digits it can hold. Whereas 8 bytes, we can go with plus or minus 1.7 times 10 power 308. What it means is like this exponential, it says like up to 15 to 16 digit after the decimal number. And example, I want to go with a variable called as a product ID and 2.75 float. So if I put f, this is a single precision, that's this one. If I want to store bigger number with a decimal, so I'll go with a double, where I want to store my product price equal to 99.99. Okay, so this is about numbers which stores with a decimal. Next data type in primitive we have is characterization. Like I'm sending a single character like a color size max, example product color code size, product code size, maybe a large L or M or S, something like that. So if that is the case, if you want to store only one character into a variable, we have a character data type. And the size is for each character, it will allocate 2 bytes in the RAM memory. So the range is between 0 to 65,535. So you might get a doubt, sir. We're talking about character, something like a CEL or something to store into a variable, then the range is this one. Yeah. So basically Java uses something called as Unicode. That means every character in the international recognized languages, they have a Unicode. So when we store particular character, that Unicode will be represented in the memory. So example, even for A to Z or A to A, ideally they have some Unicode starting from 65, I think, just check it, 65 or 66, then for A, and for B 66, something like that. So each character will have a Unicode, and that code will be stored as a digit when we deal with these characters. Okay. Example, I'm defining a variable called as size code whose data type is character, and how do we assign values within this single code and then particular character. Okay. What if I want to store a values like a true or false? Then that's where we have a Boolean data type. So Boolean can hold only two values. If we define any variable with a Boolean, so that variable can hold only true or false. Okay. Example, think that I'm defining a variable called as is in stock Boolean true, or is on sale. Example, I want to check if the particular product is on sale. So I'll use some variable called as is on sale and whose value is false. Data type is Boolean. Okay. The next one is we have a non-primitive that is object reference, but for now we'll just see one example, a string value. So a string is a sequence of character. Again, it is a Java program already written by Java or Oracle people, and it's a non-primitive, and this class is available as part of string java.lang.string package. Okay. So how do we define a string variable is we go with variable name, data type, string, and equal to, in the double quotes we give the value. Yeah, wireless Bluetooth speaker. So how much amount of memory it is going to allocate is, it depends on how many characters we have. So example, if we take this one, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8, so like that, how many characters we have times 2, that is the total number of bytes. So if it has a 25 characters, 25 times 2, so that is 50 bytes of memory will be allocated for this particular variable in the RAM, and this will be stored there. Okay. So these are the data types. So I'm going to give you some example, for practice, where you need to write a program and define what type of what data type each variable can go with and execute those programs. So example, you need to write a program called as CustomerController.Java. So you have a variable, this one, and a value, and you need to fill what is the data type it suits. Similarly, so for each variable, so if I say like double quotes, then it is a string. So what is the data type it should go with? String. And what is the moment you see double quotes, it should be string. And for this one false, then we know, right, true or false, it's a boolean. So like this, write a program and write all these variables and fill with the corresponding data type and execute it. Okay. So similarly for order control.java, write this program, write the main method, within the main method write all these variables and fill what is the data type that is best suits. Okay, and then print these variables in the system.out.println. Then we have two more, inventory controller and shipment controller. Same way, like write this program, write a main method within this one, fill this data type, what is the best data type it suits here, and then print here, print those variables. Okay. And let me show you one example so that you can practice these four programs. I'm writing one program called as product controller. Let me save this one. For saving the time, I just already typed this program. So I've defined all the variables, product rating with the data type called as a byte because my value is small, and available stock since it is beyond 127, so I'm going with a short. And similarly product ID, which is int, total sale, which is a long. Similarly float and char, boolean, on sale, and string product. Okay. So what happens is when JVM executes these lines, so this data will be stored in the RAM memory and then they will be pointed by each variable. So 5 will be pointed by this container. This will be held by this container. Okay. And after this, wherever you access those variables, these values you will get it. Let me execute it quickly. Java C product controller.java. So if we get any error, we get, see here, it is showing like integer number too large. So total sale, if we go over here, this is telling was this is bigger than integer, but by default, what is the memory it is allocated is 4 bytes only. And this number is cannot fit into 4 bytes. So we need to tell JVM allocate 8 bytes. How do we say? By specifying L. Okay. And then Java product controller. That's it. Okay. So we have defined a variable, we have assigned a values, and later we are accessing these variables. And we can write some logic also. So we will write those logic later part when we're discussing about operators and other stuff. Okay. That's it for this video. And going forward, we will be discussing everything with real-time based variables and classes and all. So there is no animal, dog kind of stuff. So keep practicing all the programs that I'm giving. Okay. Thank you. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep learning, keep coding.